Election is around the corner. What do you want to say to the first time voters who may be unsure about the candidate or the party or the agendas?
What I'll say is go on social media. I'm Jamie West, NDP everywhere. My job is to represent everybody. It doesn't matter who you vote for. I need to represent you as the MPP and what's going to be best for our community. You know, politicians will put their best face on during the election, right? They're going to tell you what you want to hear. But go back a year or two. I've got 7 years, more than that.
Housing and affordability are major concern for many Ontarians. So what solutions do you propose to address these challenges?
You know, the number one thing that I hear from new Canadians is very similar to what I hear from people who have been here for a generation or two, is it's too expensive.
You have a background in mental health and workplace safety. What policies are you pushing for to improve mental health supports and safety measures?
Because of COVID-19, there's a lot of kids who are struggling with mental health or kids who have special needs, you know, autism.
What human rights issues do you feel aren't being addressed enough in Sudbury or Ontario as a whole?
There are people living in tents right now. This visible sign of poverty I've never seen before, and I believe that housing is a human right. On top of that, my number one priority is whatever is important to the people of Sudbury. I always say, I said this in the beginning, I'll end with it, my role is to elevate and amplify the voices of the people I serve. I take that very seriously. I take what you're telling me, or you in the camera are telling me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Beyond the Borders, where we bring you conversations with leaders shaping our communities. As Ontario's February 27, 2025 snap election approaches, Sudbury voters are looking for leadership that understand their struggles and priorities. Today, we are honored to welcome the Honorable Jamie West, Sudbury's Member of Provincial Parliament, MPP, for the last 7 years, representing the New Democratic Party, NDP, as he seeks his third term in office. The Honorable Jamie first entered politics in 2018 when he defeated the Liberal incumbent with an 11,470 vote margin, securing 47.89% of the vote. In 2020, he was re-elected with over 9,500 votes, more than his closest opponent, solidifying his strong connection with the people of Sudbury. A lifelong Sudburian and advocate for workers' rights, Jamie's career has been shaped by his experience in smelter operations at Valley, leadership at the Sudbury and District Labour Council, and teaching at Laurentian University. As the official opposition critic for labor, training and skill development, Jamie is pushing for policies to support working class families, improve workplace safety, and ensure affordable living. With the snap election called by Premier Doug Ford set for February 27, 2025, Jamie is here to discuss his past accomplishment and his plan for Sudbury's future and why he believes he deserves your toss for another term. So, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, please welcome the Honorable MPP Jamie West. Welcome to Beyond the Borders.
Well, thanks, Arjun. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your time, and it's an honor to have you on the show.
Absolutely, yeah. And just to clarify, so during the election term, I'm only a candidate, but I have been the MPP for the last 7 years.
It's been already 7 years, and you are again re-electing for the third term.
Yeah.
All the best for that as well.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to the business. With Premier Doug Ford calling a snap election for February 27, 2025, what are your thoughts on the timings and the reason behind this decision? And how will it impact your campaign and priorities for Sudbury?
So, honestly, this is about Doug Ford doing what's best for Doug Ford. And it's sad that my experience over the last 7 years with the Conservative government is that they always put their party first and the people of Ontario second. A good example of that is they have the largest cabinet. So the number of people who are ministers or parliamentary assistants or associate ministers is the largest in Ontario's history. And each of those titles gives you a raise, right? So between 10, maybe more, $1,000 a year. we have people going to food banks on a regular basis, but Doug Ford's priority isn't helping people not go to food banks. It's about helping his members on his bench make more money. And that's sad. Now, he's talking about right now this election is needed because he needs a mandate to fight Donald Trump. But the reality is that he's been fishing for a reason to call an election since last spring. You can go back through the papers, all kinds of speculation about will he call in the summer, will he call in the fall. He's just looking for an excuse. Prior to calling the election, when Donald Trump was talking about the tariffs, every party, I'm a New Democrat, but the Green Party, the Liberal Party, we're all saying let's work together. This should be about the people of Ontario, not about an election. And we're seeing the results of it today. So last Friday, for example, at Vale, another 200 people were laid off. Now, we know that the resource sector is going to be hit hard. We know that manufacturing, like car manufacturing, is going to be hit hard, and these are potentially could be. Instead of taking a month and a week to have this election, we should be at Queen's Park working together, figuring out how we protect these workers' jobs, how we have retraining, skill retraining for them, how we have a compensation package for those who are going to be laid off, so they're not worried about losing their house, they're not worried about like their kids being pulled out of hockey because they can't afford to make ends meet. We should be focused on workers, and Doug Ford wants the focus to be on himself right now. Now, with a snap election in the winter, this is basically the Premier putting his thumb on the scale. He knows that it's hard for people to get out. He knows there's a lot of people who are snowbirds who won't be in Ontario, and there's not enough time for them to come vote. He knows there's a lot of people who are elderly, who have mobility challenges, who will have a hard time getting to their voting stations. And because he called the election so early, there's going to be fewer places to vote for people. So it's going to be a potentially smaller turnout. Now, this morning is a great example of this, right? I think Doug Ford is praying for a snowstorm like we had today. It took me almost 2 hours to dig myself out of my driveway, and I have a snowblower. Like, it's a big storm, and he is praying for a storm for people to not come out. I know this people of the city of Sudbury. They're very resilient. We're tough. We're a work hard, play hard city. We don't give up over anything, and I know that people are going to come out, and this is a good opportunity to send Doug Ford a message about your priorities. Because what he wants to do now, and I saw this in the last election in 2022, Doug Ford wants people to think, well, he's going to go around and he says, I have a mandate. You know what his last mandate was for? To tear up the Greenbelt and try to give his friends about $18.5 billion. That's what he said his mandate was, right? So he's going to do whatever he wants and pretends it's a mandate. So my goal is I'm going to get reelected. I'm going to say I have a mandate from the people of Sudbury because I was reelected. And the people of Sudbury, they want affordable housing. They want a house they can afford to buy and not as a dream.
Absolutely.
They want rent that they can afford.
Right.
They want to stop going to food banks. They want to stop being forgotten by this government. They want a family doctor. And that's the mandate that the people of Sudbury are sending me back to Queen's Park for.
Absolutely, absolutely. Since election is around the corner, what do you want to say to the first-time voters who may be unsure about the candidate or the party or the agendas? What do you would say to help them understand why they should trust you and the NDP with their vote this election?
Yeah, it's a great question because I've met several people who are first-time candidates and a handful of people who are new citizens, which is a great experience, and also young people who are now 18, and they've been very upfront. I haven't been paying attention, so why should I vote for you? Or I used to be part of this party, but now I'm looking at you, and so like, what do you have to share? And so there's two things on that. Is one is that talk to your friends. There are a lot of people in Sudbury. They don't even know me as the MPP for Sudbury. They just know me as Jamie, right? I do my best to be as present as possible in the community. I'm self-admittedly, I'm a workaholic. I'm happy when I'm busy. Even when I'm on vacation, I tend to go to my in-laws have a camp, and I chop wood and stack wood and stuff. I can't really sit still. So I like going to a bunch of different events. I love meeting with people. And it's my role, I say all the time as the MPP, it's my role to elevate and amplify your voices. So I have opinions on stuff. But my job is to represent everybody. It doesn't matter who you vote for. I need to represent you as the MPP and what's going to be best for our community. And sometimes that's tough decisions to make, but there's good conversation all the time. So that's the first thing is like talk to your friends about the history. If your friends don't know me very well, maybe you're all newcomers, that sort of thing. What I'll say is go on social media. I'm Jamie West NDP everywhere. On every platform that, I don't know, there's probably some obscure ones I don't know about, but all the major ones like Facebook and Instagram and Blue Sky and Twitter, it's Jamie West NDP. And scroll back a couple of years because Politicians will put their best face on during the election, right? They're going to tell you what you want to hear. But go back a year or two. I've got 7 years, more than that. I was on social media like everybody else before I was elected. See if you like the things I talk about. I've always talked about worker rights. I've always talked about how it's wrong to have wage theft. I've always talked about how you need to balance the needs of industry so they can be profitable, so people keep their jobs, and also so workplaces can be safe and people are paid fairly. So my history, my record is clear. Some of my opponents, as they're talking, well, I'm going to be honest, conservatives across Ontario are not allowed to speak. It's a well-known thing. It happened in the last election. They're not allowed to go to debates. They can't do interviews. So they just send out a message of, you need a seat at the table. You need a voice. Well, to those people, I say, well, what kind of voice are you going to have if you can't speak during an election? If Doug Ford has muzzled you before you even became an MPP in his cabinet, then what are the odds that you're going to speak on behalf of the people of Sudbury once you're elected, right? This is a leadership move by Doug Ford, where your role, and I've seen this over the last 7 years, is Doug Ford speaks, everybody else claps and shakes their head and goes, yeah, oh, good idea, good idea. So in communities where they're suffering from opioids and mental health and addictions,
Right.
conservative members do not talk about that. In communities where they don't have affordable housing, all across Ontario, conservative members do not talk about this. Those commercials you see on TV where it says, imagine Ontario, we're this, and imagine Ontario. Look, I'd love to live in an Ontario like that, and my goal is to make an Ontario like that. But Doug Ford only wants you to imagine it, and he wants his backbench MPPs and everyone around him just to clap, pretend he's doing a good job. But it's important, like people who are watching this, ask yourself, he's been the premier for the last 7 years. Is your life better than it was 7 years ago, or is it worse? Because everyone I talk to tells me it's worse, and that we need to get rid of Doug Ford and bring in a government that really has their back.
All right, moving ahead, what do you want to say to those immigrants who have recently gained their Canadian citizenship and may not know much about local politics? How will your policies specifically benefit them and their families in Sudbury?
Yeah, so I've knocked on thousands of doors like every candidate does during the election. Even in snowstorms like this, we're out knocking on doors and talking to people. The number one thing that I hear from new Canadians is very similar to what I hear from people who have been here for a generation or two, is it's too expensive. Mm-hmm. That I want to set down roots here. So I was knocking on doors actually about a block from where I grew up. I grew up in subsidized housing in Sudbury housing in the Donovan. So about a block from where my house was until I was about 12 or 13 years old. I was talking to a new citizen who is here from Côte d'Ivoire. And so I've been learning French the last couple of years, and we'll have a French conversation with her. And she said, I've graduated, I have a degree, I have a good job. So her rent is coming up because the Gear Dingham is all based on your income. And she said, I want to buy a house. I want to move out. Somebody else needs this place, right? They need people who are getting back on their feet. And that's, it's really important. They have a place where you can afford to go and your kids know they have a shelter over their head. And she's like, I want to find a place, but I can't. Everything is so expensive. I can't move anywhere. So I'm holding a place that someone else needs because rent is too unaffordable in Sudbury. So the last 7 years since Doug Ford got elected, rent's gone up in Sudbury on average by $375 a month. That is unaffordable for most people. And then kids, including my own kids, my youngest is going to be 20 next month. All three of my kids live at home with me because they cannot afford to move out. Mm-hmm. They can if they have a couple of roommates, but they can't afford to move on their own. And that was a luxury. I didn't think it was a luxury when I was their age, but I was able to move out. My wife and I had our own place that we were renting and we were saving for a house. I want that dream of home ownership to be possible for people. They don't have to get it, but like this idea for young people today where they think maybe if I win the lottery, I'll get a house, right? I don't want it to be a fantasy. I want it to be something you can work hard and you can get. And so we need policies in place that are going to turn things around, not just in Sudbury, but across Ontario, to make it easier for people to buy a house, to make houses affordable. And the way you do that is you have to be involved as a government. Mm-hmm. So as an example, Doug Ford thinks that the way that you get housing to be less expensive is it's just supply and demand. So he thinks houses are like fidget spinners, that if you build enough fidget spinners, little things you spin it on your finger, the price will come down from $10 to $1 because the market's glutted. I worked in construction for 10 years. When the market starts to glut, we stop building houses, right? We keep the price high because you want to maximize your profit. You need the government to come in and work with developers, work with the private sector, work with organizations like Community Builders just on Notre Dame that train people to be skilled tradespeople and to build affordable housing. We invest in that area, the affordable houses, the small houses, the tiny houses that were built after the Second World War. We start building those again. We make them attractive to people and at affordable cost. They can start getting into that first house. They can save for the larger house if they're able to, and we get people out of poverty, that's trapped cycle. Even people who are making good money just feel trapped by their bills all the time. We help with the cost of housing. We make life better for everybody, including newcomers.
True. All right. So, what's your key agendas for this term, and how do you plan to fulfill your promises if re-elected?
I'm sorry, my key what, sorry?
Uh, what are your key agendas?
Oh, agenda, I'm sorry. Okay.
What are your key agendas for this term, and how do you plan to fulfill your promises if re-elected?
So, before I was elected, I was working at the Coppercliff Smelter, and I got involved with health and safety. And I kind of fell in love with it. It was accidental. I started about 3 months after I was hired, maybe 4 months after I was hired. And I fell in love with it, and I see the opportunity over time of you need to learn how to listen to people. You need to understand what they want and not what you think you want, and how to clarify. Do you want me to help you with this? Do you want more lighting? Do you need, what do you really need? What would be the best thing for you? Because sometimes you get an idea, but it's not what they want. And if you're doing stuff that people don't want, they're not happy with you, right? So I learned really how to communicate effectively with people. Also, I was, just before I was elected, I was the worker safety rep for about almost 7 years before I was elected. Wow. And so I was responsible for about 400 people. That's hourly unionized members. Those are contractors. Those are management people. And you have to be able to talk to everybody, and you have to make sure that everyone feels heard, and you have to balance all their needs. And so I'm very thankful for 17 years of experience of representing workers. So right now, the number one thing I hear from people is this sense of hopelessness. And I'll give you an example. I was in Gatchel. I talked to this family. They were senior citizens, and you had the husband, his entire pension went to rent, and the wife, her entire pension went to paying the bills, so hydro and phone bill and stuff. And they went to food banks on a regular basis. And this is how the end of their life is going to go, right into their glory years. All the money coming in is going out that second. And they're not even paying all their bills. They have to go to the food bank for it. So we need to change things for people. And I've talked several times about housing, but housing is one of those ways we can change things. Our addictions that we're seeing downtown, when I talk to public health or the Nursing Association, Ontario Medical Association, about anything, they always say, what you can do to make a major impact for healthcare, for addictions, for poverty in general, is housing. If people can stay in their houses and they're not homeless, then they're not going to emergency rooms because they've been injured or because they have frostbite or because they have something wrong with their feet. They're not going to self-medicate through alcohol or drugs because they're trying to escape the reality of how terrifying everything is and how desperate things feel. And I really think the number one thing we need to do is make sure that people at the end of the day have enough money to pay their bills and then a little bit extra in their pocket, right? That they can save so their kids can go to college or university or trade school, a little bit extra in their pocket so they can bring their kids to the movies. That just relieve that feeling of despair and hopelessness. Mm-hmm. And that shouldn't be a magical thing. That's something that I think we should all take for granted. It should be the reality, especially in a country as rich as Canada, a province as rich as Ontario. And these are decisions that could be made by a government if they cared about average people, but Doug Ford doesn't. So we're saying as New Democrats, we're on your side. I am saying that if Doug Ford is reelected, I'm going to continue to stand up for him, to him, about things that are happening. That right now in Ontario, there's $60 million that's been stolen from workers. That's where unscrupulous employers don't pay their workers. Or someone steals something, a bag of chips or something in a convenience store, and the employer says that's coming into your pay. Mm-hmm. So $60 million has been reported. That's people who know it's against the law, who have reported, who the Ministry of Labor investigators have investigated and proven to be true and told those employers, you owe this money to the employee. Doug Ford hasn't gone after $1 of that. I can guarantee you elected a New Democratic government, if I become the Minister of Labor, I'm going to make an example of those worst offenders. There's the odd person who makes a mistake, who does the payroll wrong. We're not after them. But there's a guy who runs Dutchie's grocery store in Kitchener, mm-hmm. right? Over $500,000 stolen from employees. These employees, primarily newcomers from the Ukraine, on a regular basis. He hires them, he rips them off, they find work somewhere else. That's their first experience working in Canada. And I'm telling you, you come to Canada and you rip off employees, especially newcomers coming from Ukraine or anywhere.
Yeah.
If I'm Minister of Labor, I'm throwing the boots to you, right? Doug Ford doesn't care.
Wow, interesting. I'm going to touch best about your background, Having faced poverty yourself, what improvements do you believe are urgently needed in Sudbury to ensure equal opportunity for everyone? Since you were talking about equal opportunity, equity,
Absolutely.
everything. So what's your thought on this?
So just for context, my parents were separated when I was young. Sometimes people say, I'll talk about my dad. It's my stepdad. They met when I was 16. But my parents were separated when I was about 2 years old. So my mom raised my sister and I. My sister had all kinds of allergies and illnesses, was in the hospital a lot. So because of that experience with my sister, I'm a fierce advocate of free healthcare.
Right.
Doug Ford has been trying to privatize healthcare for a long time. I'm 100% against that. Going to healthcare is based on need, not based on how much was in your wallet. And I don't care if privatization means that, oh, well, technically it's going through taxpayer dollars. If it costs us more as taxpayers, twice as much money to go through a private route than a local route, I'd rather have 2 surgery rooms open than to pay twice for a private surgery through our tax dollars. So I stand up to that on a regular basis. The thing I find that's different about me than conservatives, and I'm talking about the conservative government, not the average voter, is that I know, having grown up in poverty, under the poverty line, I know that the difference that a hand up makes. That I live in Sudbury housing. I always go and knock on the doors in Sudbury housing and talk to people there about it because I want them to have role models. That, when you live here, you get a good foundation. This allows you to go to school. This allows you to have food on your table, so you're not worried about what's going forward. You have a safe place to stay at night, and there's improvements we need to make in that area. But I know that if the government can help you, you can have a much more successful life. I pay more in taxes now than I used to make at any time before I got hired at Valet. But in Valet, I paid a lot of taxes too. But if you help people, they can make a great increase of what they're able to earn in the community and give back in the community. Also, because of growing up in poverty, my mom really stressed the importance of volunteer work. And so I joke sometimes about being voluntold because my mom would just bring me to stuff when I was suddenly a volunteer. But that develops that skill level, all different skills and activities, gave me this great opportunity. My very first volunteer job was at Science North. I remember my mom bringing me to Sears, which is now closed, but I had to buy like a white shirt and black pants, and I loved computers. And my mom had to figure out a way, because we couldn't afford to buy a computer, but how can I connect with computers? And she got me a volunteer job at Science North, and I was in the computer department. So I got to play with all these computers and understand them better, but I also got to learn skills like customer service and how to explain things to people and interaction and read people, when they're feeling confused or upset. And all that's great experience when you go out looking for a job afterwards. In sum, basically, because of my background, so I grew up in poverty. My mom started a small business. I knew what it was like to work really hard. I know how hard it is to have a small business. I worked in construction for about 10 years. Then I worked at the smelter for 17 years. I'm very proud of my blue-collar roots. And so when we're talking about blue-collar workers, conservatives in general talk about them like they're, this one time I met an electrician who was a woman, and they seemed fascinated. I worked with women who were blue-collar workers, almost for 30 years. And so I'm very proud of my roots, and I'm proud of understanding how to have conversations so we're getting stuff that will really help people in those roles be more successful. We're at a point now in Southern Ontario where we have tradespeople who can't afford to build houses that they're building. Like, that's a good paying job to be a tradesperson. And if you're getting to the point where you're building a house but you're renting, you can't afford to live anywhere, that's just wrong.
Yes, you have been talking about housing and affordable living. Housing and affordability are major concern for many Ontarians. So what solutions do you propose to address these challenges?
So we have right now Marit Stiles is the leader of the Ontario NDP. So Doug Ford is a conservative leader, Marit is our leader of our party. And recently, Mart announced two things that I think are great ideas. The first one is a grocery rebate. So every month you'd get money back, just directly deposited to you or sent as a check. Because we know that groceries are more expensive. And many of us, I think, are starting to think we're getting ripped off by the grocer. You know, there are places where the cost of food goes up. In the United States, for example, there's a massive bird flu. The cost of eggs is, I don't know, $9 or $12 or something really high. That makes sense, right? There's fewer eggs, they're more expensive.
Right.
But I remember going to the grocery store to get hamburger buns or sausage buns, and they were $7, and I just walked out. I was so angry. And I have $7 in my pocket, but I'm not paying $7 for hamburger buns. Like, you know, they're usually around $4. And I just felt so ripped off by them. So one part, we give you money every month that helps you. Everybody in need gets it, right? So if you're Galen Weston, if you're the guy who owns the grocery store, you might not get it. But regular working class people, you're going to get it, right? The other thing that we need to do, and Mart announced this as well, is that there's a percentage limit. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's like 3 or 4%. So if grocery prices go up, the grocer has to explain why. And there's lots of reasons why, right? Like there's just, if you're talking about produce, there was a storm, there's less, fruit and vegetables, so the price is higher, whatever else. But it would eliminate that ability for the grocer to just rip people off on a regular basis, you know? What's interesting is just before this election, there was a couple of grocery stores that were found, they were ripping people off on the price of meat. So you would buy, hamburger or whatever else, and it would say on it, you have this much weight and here's what it costs, but the weight was wrong. And it wasn't an error, an oddball error. This was like happening in all different grocery stores on purpose. Wow. That barely made the news. I didn't see Doug Ford jump on it like a 900-pound gorilla like he always says. I'm telling you, I grew up in poverty. I respect the money that people make. I will go after people getting ripped off because it is not fair. I know how hard the people of Ontario work. They get up every morning in weather like this. I know that if it wasn't a Sunday today, and I was back at the smelter, I'd be up at 5 a.m. doing my driveway so I can get to the smelter by 6. And that's the reality for most working people. You can't have a premier who doesn't understand how important money is in people's pockets and just turn their back and go, oh, big deal, no big deal.
You just touched about your blue-collar route, Your blue-collar background has shaped your advocacy. How have these experiences influenced your approach to creating fair labor, policies?
Yeah, so I've been a labor critic for the last 7 years, and Doug Ford's Conservatives, they have a variety of bills that they all nickname Working for Workers, and every one of them has a little sprinkle of good. There's some WSIB policy for firefighters, which I think is very good and things we advocated. The first bill actually came from Jeff Birch, who's a new Democrat. They just adopted it into their bill. But a lot of the other bill is what I call a headline bill. And I've gotten in a debate now where I'll say, this is the part of my debate that's called, this is already a law. And so they will have things, for example, that on construction site, women will have their own bathroom. Well, I haven't worked in construction for almost 25 years, or about 20 years. But women had their own bathroom when I worked there. Right? Now they're pink and stuff, but they had their own bathroom, a porta potty, right? And more recently, they had one that was like the bathrooms were cleaned and inspected, and there'll be a checklist. Well, that's been a law since 1990. So basically what you're saying as a government is that you're announcing laws that already exist. And the reason you're doing this is because you want a headline. So people who don't work in construction, people who are working in offices and stuff, they'll see and they go, oh my God, Doug Ford's really working for us. But he's not. He's basically lying to you. Because this law already exists, he's not enforcing it. Another one he likes to do is, we're doubling the maximum fine. So I did my research. When was the last time they used the previous maximum fine? Not once since Doug Ford was elected did they ever use the previous maximum fine when somebody was taking advantage of workers or ripping off workers. But it sounds like they're taking it seriously because now they doubled it, right? I even made a comment to the Minister of Labor once. I said, why don't you, instead of just doubling it, to $250,000, why don't you make it like $10 million, right? Just, if you're never going to use the maximum, make the maximum super high, $100 million, right? But what people want is a government that takes workers seriously, especially when they're being ripped off. We're in a crisis right now for skilled trades. So at one point I was going to be an electrician. I was doing my apprenticeship. I know how hard it is to be in a skilled trade. I get frustrated when I see the old Home Depot commercials be like, you can do it. You cannot do what skilled trade people do. This is talent, right? You can do a little repair, but you cannot build a house the way a carpenter can, an electrician can, a plumber can. These are talented, skilled people, and we need to attract people into this field. You are not attracting people to any job by telling them they're going to have a bathroom. I've never once applied for a job and said, tell me about the bathrooms. I've never said, oh, do you have a checklist for your bathroom? And I'll tell you, as someone who worked in construction for 10 years and used porta potties, you are not attracting anyone by saying we have a porta potty. I don't care how clean it is. I don't care if it's going to be pink or whatever else. Here's what happens. You got coveralls, you got tools, you got all kinds of stuff. You got to take off your coveralls and wrap it around you. You're outside in the winter on a day like today. It's freezing cold. It's a plastic shell with a plastic toilet seat over a bucket. I don't want to be gross about it, but that's the reality. You know what we have everywhere else? Normal washrooms that flush. And you know what you can get for construction sites? Normal washrooms that flush. You can get showers there as well. Now, I know small projects, it's not going to make sense. Far north may not make sense. But downtown Toronto, I'm telling you, you can get a trailer of washrooms where people can have the dignity that they have when you go to a Tim Hortons, or at home. You can have showers at the end of the day. You can really, you want to attract somebody and you want to brag about the washrooms, have nice clean washrooms with hot water to wash your hands in.
You are the official opposition critic for labor training and skills development. What are the most, you have already talked about that, what are the most pressing labor issues facing Sudbury and as a whole in Ontario, and how do you plan to address them?
So one of the largest ones that's happening in Ontario, and it's getting a segment of Sudbury, has to do with gig workers. So people who are skip the dishes, you ride, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, all those things, right? So what Doug Ford did, there's lots of data out that people are not making even minimum wage by doing these jobs. So they've got to work 12 hours to make 8 hours worth of money. And so what Doug Ford did is he created this bill that sounds really great, and this goes back with my headlines, right? So it's the Digital Worker Rights Protection Act. And it sounds amazing, right? When you hear the title, you're like, oh, that's cool, right? So all it does is it says, when you're working, you have to make at least minimum wage. So when I was in high school, I worked at Baskin Robbins. And in the summer, super busy. And in the winter, less busy.
Right.
But I wasn't paid just when people showed up for ice cream. I was paid because I was working, right? So if you think of a taxi cab versus Uber or Lyft, right? The guy in the taxi cab, he has a minimum wage while he's driving around and stuff. And then there's a little more commission when he has a ride with him. So it ensures you're always making at least minimum wage. What Doug Ford says is you make no money until someone gets in your taxi for an Uber, right? Until someone gets in your car. And then you have to make at least minimum wage while you're driving them around. So while you're going to pick them up, nothing. After you drop them off, you're going to the next ride, nothing. But while the person's in your car, it has to be at least minimum wage. Well, in Toronto, that's coming down to about $4 an hour for a lot of people because you're paying for gas, you're paying for brakes, you're paying for your tires, right? You're bringing all the taxi, the company gives you a taxi. Uber, you bring your car and you pay for all the maintenance.
Right.
So one of the things we need to do is tackle this. We need to really focus on this and the cost of it. And it's important that we do because, one, people are working for less than minimum wage, which is unfair to those workers and also the competition in those fields. And the second one, for newcomers who are coming to Canada and are trying to get experience for employment, you're treated as a contractor instead of an employee. Even though, so you're misclassified as a contractor, as if you have a small company of your own that you're running, you don't get work experience towards your PR and your citizenship while you're doing it. So I meet people who are driving Uber and Lyft. I'll talk to them a lot when I'm in Toronto, and specifically to find out how to make this bill stronger. And they'll tell me, I have this job and I have to work 12 hours to make 8 hours worth of pay. And I also have another job that I go to so I can collect my hours towards becoming a citizen. Doug Ford doesn't care about those people at all. He doesn't care. He doesn't care if they're newcomers, doesn't care if they're living here. A lot of them are students and our kids are doing this. Doug Ford doesn't care how they're getting ripped off, to the point where he wrote a law saying, yes, that's okay, and brags about it as if it's a good thing.
So you have a background in mental health and workplace safety. What policies are you pushing for to improve mental health supports and safety measures in workplaces?
So I know you're asking specifically about workplaces, but
Yeah.
before we go there, I have to talk about in schools. That because of COVID-19, there's a lot of kids who are struggling with mental health, or kids who have special needs, autism or learning difficulties, things like that. My kids have, two of my sons have learning difficulties when they were growing up. Under Doug Ford, our kids in Sudbury our schools get $1,500 less per student in funding. So that means that educational assistants, ECEs, they don't have that kind of support that they should have. in that place. They don't have the support because there's no funding for mental health counselors, or there's fewer mental health counselors, so you have one or two doing an entire school board instead of individual schools. So that's the one thing that we have to do, because if we want to help adults, a lot of adults are parents, and a lot of their mental health and stress comes from their kids and worrying about their kids. And so we need to support kids, especially in the classroom. At an adult level, we have come a long way, I would say, in the last 15 years or so, about talking about mental health. People used to hide it more, used to, try to carry on without sharing it. People are sharing it more, but the resources aren't there. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is the field isn't exactly keeping up with people. But the other thing is there's a lot of these places that are not for profit, and they're not getting money from the government. And so if you can't afford professional care, there's nowhere else in a public option for you. Now, we know, there's all kinds of data on this, that for workplaces, mental health causes issues like presentism. So that means you go to work, but you're so distracted with mental health, or you're so distracted because you're worried about your kids and stuff, you're not really effective on the job. And so you're not getting much work done. Even though you're being paid and you're at work, you're present, but you're not actually being effective as a worker. And so if we can properly fund these not-for-profits, who have lost funding over the years through attrition, and basically as inflation goes up, their funding either flatlines or goes down, we'll do a better job of ensuring that people have better mental health going in the future. The other thing as well is that it all ties back to affordability. Because it's so expensive, because people are, every year for the last 7 years, more working people are going to food banks. 1 in 4 people in food banks have work as their primary form of income. 1 in 4. That number has climbed for the last 8 years. So, okay, let's blame the Liberals, right? Because Doug Ford wasn't the premier 8 years ago, but he has been for the last 7 years. So let's give him 3 years. He had to turn the ship around, right? After the 4th year, you don't get credit anymore. The 5th year, the 6th year, the 7th year, you don't get credit anymore. People are going to food banks because of policies the Conservatives are making, and they don't care. You want to help people's mental health? Make sure they got food in their stomach. Make sure they got a roof over their head. It's that simple. It's very, very simple. This isn't rocket science, right? Like, this is basic needs. And he doesn't get it because he grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth, and he doesn't care about anybody except for Doug Ford cares about Doug Ford, and he cares about his wealthy and well-connected friends. That's it.
All right, moving ahead, you have been a fierce advocate for human rights as well. What human rights issues do you feel aren't being addressed enough in Sudbury or Ontario as a whole?
I've talked a lot about housing, and I'm going to have to stay on that.
Yeah.
It's housing.
Housing,
I grew up.
food.
I grew up in this city. I'm not going to pretend that we didn't have people who were homeless. We did. We had people, couch surfing and things like that. I have never seen the level of poverty that I see today. This idea of there is not an intersection in this city where there's not someone panhandling. There is not a place in this city where you can walk your dog on these trails and stuff and not see a tent. The high today with the wind chill is minus 20. There are people living in tents right now. This visible sign of poverty I've never seen before, and I believe that housing is a human right. Not only, I'm a lefty, right, so I a lot of my decisions with my heart, but because I've spent so much time in health and safety and mining companies and stuff, you have to bring an economic argument as well. So economically, it is cheaper for us to have housing for people. Economically, it's cheaper for us to have rent control that brings rent down. Also, landlords need to make a living, right? But not to the point where they gouge people. In Sudbury, we have a lot of faceless, corpus landlords who are buying up properties all over the city. They're boards of people. You'll see their signs. The sign will say, "I buy houses." It looks like it's written with a magic marker. Those are mass printed out. There's a flyer. We're looking for a house in your area. There's great, and they'll cross it out and say excellent. Those are mass printed flyers and delivered by the post office to people. So it looks like a regular guy, but it's a board that sees housing as an investment opportunity. And many people know this and experience it already. What they do is they start trying to push the tenants out. They'll bribe the tenants. They'll say, "I'll give you $4,000 to move out." Because $4,000, if you can take a place that's $700 a month or $900 a month and make it $2,000 or $2,500 a month once they kick that tenant out, is pretty to their advantage, right? And they'll use all kinds of horrible tricks that I never saw locally with our kind of mom and pop landlords that we have here. Primarily people in Sudbury, there's the odd apartment building, but most people, they're renting and their landlord lives next door, but there's more and more of these sort of predatory landlords from Southern Ontario that sees an investment opportunity. They don't care for the house. They don't care for the people who are there. So in terms of human rights, we need to provide housing that's affordable for people, that's safe for people, and that will take care of a lot of the other issues, and in the long run be less expensive for everybody.
Absolutely. Almost at the end, what's your favorite thing about Sudbury? You've grown up here, you raised in here, you have done everything, you have contributed everything in here. And how does it inspire you to represent the community?
So there's a couple of things that I say a lot at Queen's Park about Sudbury, right? So one of them is that Sudbury's a community that cares. And we just are. People come together. I remember several years ago there was a fire in Garson, and the family was devastated. And like 2 days later in the paper, the family was saying, please, we don't need any more donations. Within 2 days, people of Sudbury, he gave them so much in terms of, Christmas presents and furniture and clothing because they lost everything that they said, please donate that somewhere else. We have enough for now. So it's a sign of how quickly the community came together, but also that family who was in desperate need, when they got what they needed, they were like, look, there's other people who need stuff, give it to them. So I'm always really proud about that charitable side of Sudbury and how we care. The other thing I say about Sudbury a lot is that we're a small town disguised as a city. We got the Costco and we got you don't know everybody in town, but you know somebody who knows everybody in town. And it creates that sort of friendly nature, right? When someone passes you on the sidewalk, they say hi even though they don't know you. And that builds us as community, right? We're all neighbors and friends. Having grown up in Sudbury in the 70s, many of us came here from other countries or other provinces to work in the mines, primarily for the mines back in the 70s. And so you had these small families. For me, it was my mom, my sister, and I. But every vacation, every holiday, graduation stuff, the house would be packed because you ended up having this chosen family, right? Your friends would all come by. You're all kind of in the same boat. And I see that now in this newer wave of immigration where people are coming here. A lot of people for school or work and are coming here and they're sharing their culture and tradition. And that I think that intertwines us, that fabric. And it's generational, right? We've been doing this for so long. It's just so normalized for us that I want to learn more about your culture and I want to come to your events and so that builds as well. And I'd say the final thing that I love about this city is we just get stuff done. I once, when I was president of Labour Council, there was a sociologist who was here from the UK. She was studying Sudbury and a similar town in Southern Ontario. She didn't tell me which one, but kind of same demographics, right? Like a heavy blue collar industry, they had hospitals or whatever else. And Sudbury had accomplished all these things that the other one didn't. Not that the other one was bad, but we had these major achievements, and things that happened. And she asked me why, and she was like, I'm going to go to a Wolves game, and maybe that's it. And I said, well, no one told us we couldn't. And I don't think we'd believe them if we did. And that was really the soul of Sudbury, is that we were saying to people that there was a point in Sudbury where we weren't going to have a cancer center. The government of the day said, you're never going to have one. It's too expensive. And the people of Sudbury said, yes, we will. And we have cancer locally because we will not put up on people having to travel 4 hours for cancer care. That families can't visit you for cancer care. They did the same thing for the PET scanner, the San Bruno PET scanner, right? They said, you need to raise this much money, so we did. Well, this much? No, actually we need this much. So we raised that much money. Now we have a PET scanner in Sudbury. We have the CROSH, Center for Research on Occupational Safety and Health. These are all things that are examples, indie cinema, I can list a whole bunch of these. These are all examples of things where someone had an idea in Sudbury and said, I'm going to do this. And the people of Sudbury, because we've been doing this for so long, go, yeah, I'm going to help you. Yeah, we're going to get that done. And every time the government says, no, you won't, we say, yeah, we will, right? And that's the thing with Doug Ford and the Conservatives. They don't understand this city. They're calling an election in a snowstorm. We're going to show up and vote, and we're going to vote them out.
All right. So, what's your message to the voters about why they should trust you with another term? Why they should re-elect you? Why West is best?
So it's handy having a name that's West is best. Look, a lot of when I'm working and representing people, I wonder what people will say to my kids, right? At some point, they're going to run into my kids, maybe years after I'm elected, after I'm not running anymore, right? And they'll say, "Oh, are you related to Jamie West?" And I want them to say, man, he worked hard. Oh, he really cared about this place. I don't want them to say negative things to my kids, right?
Yeah.
I want them to say, he really did his best at all times. He really went the extra mile. I remember he showed up. I remember he drove through a snowstorm to be with us. I remember he came to my funeral, my dad's funeral. I remember that, not just the big events, all the time. I remember him fighting for me at Queen's Park, right? I want my kids to think about their dad as a role model and someone who they can be proud of. And that translates into, I want the people who are voting for me to be proud of how hard I worked. I did really well in the first election. And the reason I did is it was a change election. People were mad at the Liberals, they were voting them out. And I worked as hard as I could over 4 years to prove to people that it was not just a fluke, that they made a good choice because they trusted me with their vote. And those same people came back again to vote for me. And I won by a wide margin again. And my goal in this election is to win by a lot. Now, Doug Ford is counting on the bad weather or people thinking that I'm going to do well. People aren't going to show up to vote. But I'm telling you, the people of the city of Sudbury who know me, not just as MPP West, but just Jamie who comes to our events, Jamie who speaks to me, Jamie who called me in the middle of the night, Jamie who took my situation, helped me in my office, or brought it to Queen's Park, those people are going to come out and vote. And it's going to send a message to Doug Ford. And our mandate is going to be to make life better in Sudbury.
All right, that's the point. If re-elected, what legacy would you like to leave behind after your next term?
I would like, in the next term, I really think we need to tackle how workers are not getting a fair share, primarily as gig workers. I would like to change that so that they're making a decent wage. These people who are delivering food and driving Ubers and stuff, making a decent wage. And if Doug Ford, because if he's able to get reelected in a majority, votes that down, I want the people of Ontario to all understand how those workers are getting ripped off and how the Conservatives turn their back on them. Because it is not fair for somebody to be working 8 hours a day and not making at least minimum wage for that 8 hours a day. On top of that, my number one priority is whatever is important to the people of Sudbury. I always say, I said this in the beginning, I'll end with it. My role is to elevate and amplify the voices of the people I serve. I take that very seriously. I take what you're telling me, or you in the camera are telling me, right? I bring that to Queen's Park and I talk about, I was with Arjun. Arjun told me this. Here's what you need to know. I was talking to a student from Laurentian University who was so worried about the price of rent and who has a part-time job but gets direct deposit, that she's worried on every Friday that her check will be late and then one of her bills will bounce and she can't pay the NSF. This is not fair to students. This isn't fair to seniors. This isn't fair to parents, right? I'm going to amplify your voices to ensure we have a better way of life and that you're not feeling as hopeless and as stressed out because Doug Ford doesn't care about you. I want the people of Sudbury to know that I do care.
Thank you so much for your time, and I'll talk to you after you're reelected as the MPP for Sudbury.
Perfect.
Thank you
you
so
very
much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This was fun.